Dragon Age the Veilguard is a game with such a divisive launch. I can barely remember anything like it in recent years. People seem to hate it or love it, with no in-betweens. What if this game is actually an in-between? How to navigate through this narrative mud, avoiding the hate, the coping, and the general brain rot? I hope to provide those answers for you. Hi everybody, Ghost here, and this time I'm going to delve into Dragon Age the Veilguard. As always, let me introduce myself. I play video games, mostly RPGs, as a completionist. I strive to reach their full completion status. That to me means not only gathering all achievements, but also trying different choices and experiencing the various branches in the story the game has to offer, if there's any. Only at that point I feel I know enough to share my thoughts, and Dragon Age the Veilguard is the icon representing why, for me, it's important to do so. I did the first impressions video after about 20 hours in, that shared my moderately positive opinion of the game. But after little more than 200 hours spent playing it in 3 different playthroughs, one of them at nightmare difficulty, experiencing the 3 base classes and always making different choices, I have to say my overall opinion of it has been decreased by a notch. I also apologize for this video being so late. I had a prolonged cold that prevented me from recording, and the holiday festivities took up a lot of my time. This game for me is the very definition of a mixed bag, with some aspects of it done very well and others quite poorly. Since I don't want to do scores, I talk about various aspects of the game I play instead. I'll divide them into categories, more or less as I usually do for my reviews, to approach every single aspect separately and not get lost in the maelstrom. In this way I think you can make up your own mind, agreeing or disagreeing with the various points I make. Also, since English is not my first language, I always provide subtitles, just in case I pronounce something in an unusual way. Dragon Age the Veilguard has been released the 31st of October 2024, developed by BioWare and published by Electronic Arts, 10 years since Inquisition came out. By my research, the development of Veilguard started in 2015 and was marked by delays, big changes in design and high staff turnover. Veilguard was also meant to be a live service game, which made a U-turn into being a single-player game, and all these problems pretty much showed themselves in the final release of the game. Veilguard might be considered an action RPG, but for me it leaned more on the action-adventure side, for a series of reasons I'm going to illustrate. Not that an action-adventure game can be good, I love quite a few of them, but I think this shows yet another change this series underwent. Also, the fact that you can unlock all achievements for this game in a single thorough playthrough speaks volumes about the branching of this product. This is going to require some time. Without further ado, let's dive into the details. I'll usually start with the technical state of a game, because it's most often a game-breaking situation. I have to report that the state of Veilguard is incredibly solid, one of its best features. It crashed a couple of times in the 200 hours I played it, and I haven't experienced any particular bug worth mentioning, so technically speaking, it's pretty good for a release of this day and age. It also runs pretty smoothly. I had just a few hiccups here and there in areas with a lot of foliage or urban ones, but maybe it was just due to my hardware that, while solid, it's not the latest, and also my stubbornness in playing it at ultra settings while also recording it. The RTX should take care of that separately, but it's never that simple. I've also experienced a pleasant surprise with an update for the Nvidia control panel. It asked me to optimize some games, and while I usually don't trust the kind of automatic stuff, I tried it on Veilguard and it actually did a good job. The game performed better while keeping the graphical options at ultra. Speaking of options, I also have to report that there are quite a lot of accessibility ones, making this game usable to a very wide audience. The only annoying part regarding the technical side is that the game, using the Frostbite engine, compiles shaders for a very long time the first time you put it up and every time you update your graphics card drivers. It will also verify those shaders every time you boot the game up, which is faster but can still be a minor annoyance for slower machines. On the flip side, loading times during gameplay are very fast. You don't have loading screens while changing areas. The game also auto-saves constantly, even before any dialogue decision you make, so you can load back and try a different option. Not that it matters for the most part, as I'm going to explain later, but there are 3 or 4 instances in which it is interesting to explore different outcomes. I also have to mention that some keyboards were not properly recognized by the game. It pertains to some very peculiar keyboards. The most common ones should not be a problem, but you'll never know. Mine was giving problems on the EA account window, but thankfully worked properly in the game. Speaking of EA accounts, the game asks if you want to create one, but it's not mandatory. Veilguard is receiving some patches, some more impactful than others, but I have the feeling EA is already gently letting this game go. They announced that Veilguard is not receiving any DLCs. On one side, it's good to know you're paying for the entire product. On the other, it's not a good sign. I won't ever believe a publisher like EA won't milk more money out of a product if it thinks it's valuable. Now, into the real juicy part for a lot of players. As in every game of this kind, one of the very first things you do is character creation. You'll choose your race between elf, Kunari, human and dwarf, and then you'll start meddling with your character's appearance. The sculpting system felt weird to me, like playing with Paddy, but I'll admit I'm a guy who doesn't like to spend too much time on appearance. The first thing I noticed with the presets is that most men looked feminine to me and all women were muscular. There are quite a few sliders for various body parts, but they change very little. You can make a tall character, according to the slider, and still be short compared to everyone else in cutscenes. No exaggerated appearances like men on steroids or women with big breasts. I usually pick a preset, change very noticeable things like hair color and models, beards, little else and call it done. But some people were capable of creating quite a few personalized characters, so it should be possible with enough effort to create something decent. You'll get access to a mirror to change your appearance almost immediately, so I won't sweat too much on customization since you can easily fix it later. The character always looked a little cartoonish to me, but this is a later talk. I didn't like most of the hair and beard models, but when I played the female rogue I noticed that the hair physics is very good. Then, you'll choose your class between three: warrior, rogue and mage. Those are your basic classes that you can change later, while at level 20 you select a subclass. There are 3 subclasses for every class, and since you can respec freely, you can also change it at will by just reallocating points in different directions on your skill tree. Every core class has a resource to manage that you'll consume using your active skills. It's rage for the warrior, momentum for the rogue, and mana for the mage. Warriors and rogues build up their relative resource while fighting, while mages start at full mana and need to regain it during combat. Every class has a quite different style of combat, with different key bindings too. Having played all 3 core classes, I can say that this difference is one of the game aspects that I appreciated the most. I ended up enjoying the champion subclass for the warrior a lot. It was very tough, and in the late game I was able to parry absolutely everything, even stuff I think I wasn't supposed to. For the rogue, I appreciated the zippy and fast dodging around, coupling it with the Veil Ranger subclass. It's essentially an archer. Combined with the tanky companion and the crowd controller, it was able to deal an insane amount of single shot damage. It was also the character I played my nightmare run with. For the mage, I ended up playing the Death Caller, which turned out to be Death Ray Joe and was crazy powerful. It was weird to see that they went a long way to say that you can play the Blood Mage in this game, when the Death Caller uses their own life when out of mana, and heals themselves, leeching health from enemies. What is this if not blood magic? Eventually, you enter a loop in which you steal so much life from the damage you do to your enemies that using your own to power your Death Ray won't even be an issue. Now, there's a thing worth noting, most noticeable at higher difficulties. Class specialization will narrow you down into dealing 1 or 2 types of damage, and you'll eventually find enemies resistant to that. It's not a big problem at normal difficulty because you'll overcome the damage reduction, but at higher ones, it can be a nuisance, and I haven't found a way to really cycle your damage type when you get really specialized. Moving on, after selecting your class, you're going to choose a faction, which is essentially your background or origin, if you will. You'll get a brief report about your past, and it will be referenced now and then in dialogue. Your background ties you with one of the factions, and they'll recognize you as one of their own in some lines of dialogue. It doesn't really give you a lot of benefits for belonging with them. Also, not all factions are created equal. Grey Warden and Mornwatch have the most customized dialogue with factions and companions, followed by the Shadow Dragons. Other factions give you almost nothing. Regarding the bonuses your background gives you, like bonus damage to Darkspawn, if you play at higher difficulties where this matters, consider that the kind of enemies you're going to encounter the most are Darkspawn and Venatori. Other bonuses are less useful. I wished I could play my origin like in the first game, when stuff actually happens, instead of reading a summary of it at the character creation. Afterward, you choose the difficulty you're going to play among 5 different ones, plus the unbound difficulty that makes you customize different options regarding the experience you want. Normal is pretty easy, especially after the first few hours. Nightmare difficulty is not that bad, even beneficial because it makes you value every single piece of loot or equipment you find, but boss fights tend to drag a lot, even for 40 or 50 minutes, and towards the end of the game you'll mostly likely be tired of them. And you can change your difficulty if you're playing at Nightmare, you'll have to start anew. A funny quirk is that you can choose your character name, but it's never ever referenced in the game. You'll just be called Rook all the time, even in writing. At last, in the Summary tab you have an option to customize the experience you had in Inquisition, the previous game. Customize might be a strong word here, because you create the appearance of your past Inquisitor, set if you disbanded the Inquisition or not, and who you romanced. Minor spoiler here, all of this will only matter if you had a female Elven Inquisitor who romanced Solas. Everything else is pointless, and this is a part that enraged a lot of Dragon Age hardcore fans. BioWare has an entire website at their disposal, Dragon Age Keep, that allows you to customize the world state with almost all previous games' choices, and they decided to scrap it all. They decided to ask you only about 3 choices instead, and of those 3, only one matters. This gave the impression they considered everything that happened before just baggage to get rid of, but a lot of players are interested in the overall state of the world they shaped in the previous games. Now, let's consider the progression system. The progression is level-based, and every level will grant you a point to spend in a node of a skill tree. You start from the center and proceed in the direction of the specialization you want, at least in theory, but in practice most builds are scattered all over the place. There is also a specific point of interest type, the Dreadwolf Altar, that will grant you 1 additional skill point every time you complete the related activity. Max level is 50, and by then you'll have more points than you need. The skill tree is composed of a few active skills and a lot of passive ones, like resisting more damage, dealing more elemental damage of some kind, generating more mana, having more arrows in your quiver, and so on. Finding passives that stack is the key to success. I would even say that the passives are the most important part of your build. You can only use 3 active skills in any given battle, so buying more doesn't help you much, besides increasing your ability damage by 15%. Given the elemental damage specialization and enemies' resistances, if they expected you to change build given the boss fight you have to face, they should have given you the possibility to save loadouts, but they didn't. This is most noticeable at higher difficulties. You can't even search the tree for a keyword, let's say mana, to find all the nodes influencing your mana as a mage. If you don't want to read them all, some websites fix this, and you can plan your builds on them. A good thing about this tree is that you can respec whenever you want, easily, without resorting to weird potions to craft or punitive prices at specific NPCs, so you can try and experiment to your heart content, even changing specialization. And since you can't sell the equipment pieces you find, you'll have a good number of them at your disposal to try different approaches. As said, at level 20 you may enter a class specialization, and every one of them also has 2 small but powerful branches that you can unlock at level 30 and 40. For example, the mage can specialize into being a Deathcaller, an Evoker, or a Spellblade. They all push you into a very different kind of gameplay, which is nice. So at the end of the day, I put the progression system in the positive basket for this game, even if it's a little weird for an RPG. Now, for the story, it's with a heavy heart that I have to report that a lot pertaining to the writing in this game wasn't great. From the main to the secondary quests, to companions, to dialogues. I had the strong feeling everything was written with an audience in mind that wasn't me, as an old RPG player. I don't even think it's meant for Dragon Age fans. I mean fans of the previous games. A lot of the franchise lore has been put aside or ignored. One could argue that the main story isn't that bad, and at least it's somewhat Dragon Age lore related, but it's so diluted among a great number of other missions and storylines that made the game feel bloated, resulting in serious pacing problems. Now, I don't think they made this with the purpose of angering old Origins fans. I think they tried to tell stories so watered down and safe that they could appeal to the largest audience possible. A lot of big companies in gaming are now very risk averse. In Baldur's Gate 3, you can not only dismiss your companions for good, but you can kill Karlach and chop her head off. In Veilguard, when you meet a new companion that's supposed to join you, your only possible answers are yes, yes please, yes so cool. When one of your companions is behaving strangely, your only options is to be fully supportive of whatever reason they had to be like that. This made Rook a completely bland character to me, without any personality I could appreciate. I didn't even understand why they're the leader. Maybe the logic here is because Varric said so. But I have other qualities in mind for leaders, besides blindly supporting your crew. Dialogue lines felt coming from kindergarten teachers that want the other little children to be good and behave. And this is so bad for the immersion and the suspension of disbelief, because adults don't behave like that, especially in highly stressful situations. Also, the language the characters use is so modern that it contributes to this bad feeling. You don't read people in good fantasy books saying words like okay, team, snipers, ranged attackers, and so on. There are many examples of this during the whole game. In the RP communities I used to play with, you got penalized for doing so.
Her manipulation of the Hylic spheres put some circle mages I know to shame.
Oh, that's so nice, really?
Balara, repairing the Illuvian network alone is worth a thesis.
You were here, what, 5 minutes, and you had that thing fixed?
And it's quite a complex mechanism.
Well, thank you.
That said, I've noticed you working at all hours on that artifact.
Really? I don't think it's all ours.
And you're either the first to wake, or you simply aren't sleeping some nights.
Thank you, Professor, but I'm fine. Mostly.
We need you rested and ready to go, at all times.
Maybe I've had a late night, or two, or more. And maybe I fell asleep in my breakfast. A couple of times. But we're in Solus's old home. There's so much to learn.
And we've time to learn it. But in order to do that, you must take care of yourself.
The game in general feels written for kids, and there is so little blood, no dramatic tension between companions. It feels like playing in a safe zone for a really young audience. I don't even understand how this game is rated mature, for this franchise started as one of the most violent RPGs in history.
The Dwarven kingdoms were the first to fall, and from the deep roads, the dark spawn drove at us again and again, until finally we neared annihilation. Until the Grey Wardens came. Men and women from every race, warriors and mages, barbarians and kings. The Grey Wardens sacrificed everything to stem the tide of darkness, and prevailed.
It's true that every Dragon Age game was substantially different from its predecessor, but usually the themes and issues at hand had always been heavy. Not here, except for a few main story sections. I won't talk in great detail about those storylines to avoid big spoilers. Let's just say the game is divided into 3 acts. In the first act, you have to gather your team, among the various regions of the world to face the disaster you, Varric and Solas unleashed upon the world. There is an apparent big decision in this act, but it will only mostly graphically change one of the maps and give you a couple of different secondary quests. And the choice that makes little sense given the context is the one rewarding you the most in the long run. In the second act, very little happens, except playing all your companions' quests and solving their personal problems because they are distracted and cannot perform adequately to fight the big baddies. Kicking them in the butt is not an option. The world is ending and you play therapist for your buddies. The third act is the conclusion, and it's when the story gains momentum and leads you to the last 3 or 4 good hours of gameplay. That is an amalgam of Mass Effect 2 and 3 endings. Technically there are 3 endings, with slight variations depending on your decisions during the main story. Those that have an impact are quite few. Most of the warnings you get during dialogues that a certain companion or NPC will remember what you said or did are inconsequential. consequential. I can't say it otherwise, but those messages are mostly fake. I played this game multiple times, choosing different actions and dialogue options on purpose. Rook has little agency in what's happening, and every dialogue choice except those 3 or 4 I mentioned will lead to the same result. That's why I say this game is leaning more on the action-adventure side than on the RPG one. It isn't necessarily a bad thing. I enjoyed Horizon Zero Dawn while the story was completely railroaded, but it feels very strange in a Dragon Age game. Previous games were all about choices. We could also say that in every RPG the main story is interrupted constantly by secondary quests. It's pretty much one of the defining aspects of the genre. But what strikes here is the complete change in tone between different quests. Some of them go from cringy to be the same as watching a Pixar movie. With all due respect to Pixar, it's the tone that's completely off. I don't understand why, with the end of the world at the gate, I should go to dinner with you and your mother to watch you fly off the handle when she behaves like most mothers do. I get it, it's complicated, but all families are. And this didn't click well with everything else happening. It's just an example, but there are many others. It almost feels like different writing teams were assigned different characters and quests, and they didn't communicate with each other to ensure they were on the same page. Or that there was no supervision, and I can't believe this was the case. The dialogue is also all over the place, not only with Rook, but also in party banter. When playing the warrior, I was going around with Ardyn and Bellara, because they complemented my champion well, but their banter felt like finding yourself among little girls at a sleepover.
Almost. Every time we meet someone, you already know them. Morgan, the crows, the wardens, and the chantry lady with the big hat. Not to mention the Dreadwolf himself.
Oh, is that everyone? You didn't even list 10 people.
It feels like a lot of people.
When playing the Rogue Archer, I had Davrin and Nev with me for the same reason, and their banter was immensely better. Two adults talking between themselves, sometimes snarky, sometimes cynical, but coherent.
Don't let them near the girl!
You got here fast enough.
They've got the guards at their back.
Where are all the wardens? Busy. Stand back battle outside.
We're on our own!
With the mage, I mostly had Emmerich and Tash with me, and he was great, because I was the Death Caller from the Morn Watch like him, and he felt like a professor teaching Rook stuff. Tash was just mean to Emmerich.
By seal and flame, who brought despair in our midst? Despair? Who brought it here? The Venatori. Of course. This way, please.
The Watchers never taught me that.
The colloquial term is corpse whispering, a gift that manifested with my magic.
Corpses talk to you? That's messed up.
Oh, there's no danger in it, I assure you.
That's not the messed up part. Hey, corpse guy.
It's Emmerich. Please.
I heard Navarra has lots of dragons. You ever see a Wildervale spitter?
I can't say that I have.
You know it can breathe fire or poison gas.
It's not really my area of expertise.
The fire breath is actually just the poison gas. It burns when the dragon breathes.
Ah,
Most dragons always ignite their breath. The spitter's special for being able to choose whether to light it up.
Companions' quests are also very different in tone. Every one of them has a decision you have to make nearing the end, and while some have a sort of different ending, others are exactly the same no matter what you decide. Just as an example, Lucanis' one has the same ending, whatever your choice is. Emmerich's one changes quite a bit, and was an interesting Companions' quest, but with the wrong tone. It felt like a mix of the Addams Family and a cartoon. Ardyn's personal quest was the most interesting for Dragon Age lore, with possible huge implications, but they dropped the ball. The game gets into huge lore revelations, then literally tells you long story and shuts down. Really disappointing. I can forgive some random uninspired quest in the game world, the ones you grab from some bland NPC in a corner of a map, built in just as fillers. But here we're talking about major storylines for your companions, or for cameos from the previous games. The dialogue wheel is not really there, as dialogue in general is very railroaded as the game itself. Choices in the wheel have no consequence, like for example in Horizon Zero Dawn, where you can choose the logical, passionate or angry options for Aloy, and they will only change the recorded line the main character is going to say. Again, not necessarily a problem, but a watered down version of what previous Dragon Age games were. In general, all storylines have no complexity, everything is just as it appears. There are a couple of good plot twists here and there, but everything is generally very upfront. I will conclude this section by saying everything about Solas's storyline is weird. I never liked him in the first place, and that's fine to me because it fits the storyline Trespasser presents you. But in Veilguard, major previous Solas's story events are missing, again forgotten in the attic, like all the elves at the end of Trespasser. I guess the story message was about the bad things a man can do for all the right reasons, but a lot escaped among the cracks. Regarding the exploration and the world Veilguard presents to us, I have to say that the level design was one of the strongest parts this game had to offer. While I perfectly understand that not everyone is interested in fully completing a map, doing all the related activities, this aspect is very important to me, so I appreciate it being substantial. The game has a central hub for quests, the Lighthouse, an old refuge of Solas in the Fade in which you'll squatter in. The gameplay loop essentially revolves around receiving quests at the Lighthouse, by your companions or by ladder, and teleporting away to follow them. This headquarters of sorts is also where the vast majority of companions' interactions happen, with you or between themselves. You have temporary dialogue cutscenes marked on your map that will expire if you leave to do something else, missions and optional dialogue moments, all marked with a different icon on the Lighthouse map. This area has some secrets to discover that will be available to you proceeding with the main story, and it's vaguely customizable. I say vaguely because you can place some decorations in your room and change the outside statue, but that's pretty much it. Some of your companions, on the other hand, can and will personalize their space with time. The most impressive example of this is Harding's room, which goes from being an abandoned, dead and dry interior garden to a lush camping spot. Not all companions will personalize their space this thoroughly, but it was cool to see. Running around your base, you can also find your companions talking to each other, revealing some information about themselves or bonding with each other. You find them doing so when you're usually running to the caretaker, who has a workshop in the courtyard that you can level up by finding mementos around the various areas. Here you can upgrade your equipment and yours and your companion's skills. Not everyone discovered that the skills are enchantable too. The game doesn't explain it. From the Lighthouse, you access the crossroads through an Alluvian, an ancient elven magic mirror capable of transporting you to other places. You should be familiar with Alluvians if you played the other games. The crossroads are, as the name implies, a place that connects you to all the other possible destinations. It has a central hub itself that will populate with spirit merchants over time, and a bunch of islands with more mirrors in them. Those will get you to all the other places. You won't have to use the crossroads every time, you can just fast travel to a beacon you've already discovered in the map, but passing through them is useful because there is treasure and quests to be found and solved. The elven gods are polluting this place in the Fade, and reclaiming it will be a long-term game endeavor. A lot of these activities will reward you with Solas's memories or unique gear pieces. Secondary quests tied to the main story will take place at the crossroads, and glancing them will reward you with the dialogue line near the ending. Speaking of the world of Thedas, Veilguard will offer you 6 big regions to explore, plus an arena, and smaller maps temporarily available for companions' personal quests. The regions are essentially 6 different biomes, all beautiful and with the classic action-adventure activities to perform in them. Those activities are chests to loot, both common and from the unique variety, finding Fenarel's or Evanuris' altars, fighting champions, and finding quests. When you discover one of those points of interest, the game will mark it on your map, so you can come back later if you want to deal with it another time. Bigger chests will grant you equipment for you or your companions, and this loot is not randomized. There are guides on where to find every piece of loot you might need for your build. The Evanuris' altars have a strange activity to perform, smashing 4 or 5 symbols floating into the air, after which they'll grant you plus 100 hit points per altar. A pretty really solid upgrade, but you don't have an explanation on why you're doing this. The Dread Wolf's altars will show you direction to a Solas's statuette. Once recovered, you get a free skill point to spend in your tree. Some are a bit tricky to find. A certain number of these activities are locked behind puzzles that generally are quite easy to solve, except for maybe 2 or 3, and it was fine for me because I don't like puzzles, riddles, and that kind of stuff. The game maps track how many of these points of interest you've already found and how many you're missing. It's worth going out of your way to explore, because you can always find something hidden in corners, be it a chest, a shortcut to unlock, or a codex entry. I should also mention that there are a huge number of smaller chests or vases that grant you some coins or junk to sell to merchants, and those are not marked on your map. They all add up and in the long term are useful to find, because selling junk to merchants will increase the faction strength. The traditional hate for creator pottery is also present, and you always find something by breaking stuff. One thing I didn't like about the loot is that while it's very bright and visible, and you can manage this in the options, you open chests like you're in God of War, and money and light explodes out of them. It felt like a mobile or gacha game in this regard. Talking about map navigation, every companion has a special ability that will manipulate the interaction with the map in some way, and they are mandatory for completing the maps. For example, Lucanis can evoke platforms to reach apparently inaccessible points, or Tash can breathe fire to melt down walls or explode barrels. You don't even need to have that specific companion with you to do so. You can evoke their special through the Solas's Lyrium dagger you snatched, and this was quite handy. Not that changing companions in your active party is difficult. You have numerous beacons scattered throughout the maps. They function as respawn and fast travel points, as well as allowing you to swap companions and recharge your healing potions. Each companion will come from one of the world regions, except for Harding. I found the region's level design to be great. It was fun for me to explore, discover chests, shortcuts, and altars. Part of those maps will become available after some companions quests, and as I said, the game will track your map completion. While all those areas are different and gorgeous in their own way, the fact that you simply teleport from one to another can be somewhat detrimental to immersion. For me, a big part of RPG's fun is to explore the world, facing the voyage and dealing with the encounters along the road. I'm not saying every RPG needs to be open world. Having separate big areas is fine too, but losing the sense of discovery and adventure to a magical gimmick like crossing a teleporting mirror felt like a shortcut taken in development. I like to travel in my games, at least at the beginning of the adventure. The shortcuts can come later, before it gets tedious, but starting with the fast travel to a region and having the on-screen presentation of it with a strong cut and music feels like a live service game heritage they never got rid of. An annoying aspect in exploration is that companions constantly tell you what to do. You find a puzzle, they immediately give you a hint. You find a ballista, they tell you to use it to break a wall. The hand-holding is real and excessive, like the game thinks it's talking to a 5-year-old. On the contrary, a strong point was that when the party's banter is interrupted by a fight, after it companions will say something like, "Where were we?" and continue the talk they were having. This is a nice touch that shows attention to detail. Companions' quests lead you to separate instances in the regional map, or to new maps you won't come back to. This again feels so much like live service heritage. The loot you find during those instances is not counted towards the map total exploration, but you can unlock shortcuts for the general regional map, so again, it's always useful to explore. You also have a fight in arena, which is essentially the Lord of Fortune faction quest. You fight against groups of enemies and will receive a unique ring after winning 10 encounters. Isabella will tell you the same 5 lines over and over again, so it's not a particularly inspired piece of this game, but it's useful for testing builds. As a last note, I'd say that from the immersion point of view, I wish they spent more time on aligning the setting with the maps. For example, Mingrathus is said to have an incredible amount of slaves working for the Tevinter mages, but you'll never see one. The one you save is in Nevara and from the Venatori. It's true that the city map is full of destitute people, but never seeing a slave in Slave City Central is pretty weird. There is the entire faction of the Shadow Dragons fighting to free slaves. It can also be one of your backgrounds, but you never see them in action. It was so weird to me. What's a better engaging quest than contributing to an operation aimed at freeing slaves? There was none. I wonder if this is part of that safe space they seemingly wanted to create. Like, life is rough, but we don't want to show it, so maybe we can sell more copies. Racism against the elves is also completely gone. My rogue was an elf, and it never ever came up in any conversation. I only had one missable dialogue line saying humans look down on us, and that's it. If you played the previous games, you know elves have it really rough in this setting. Unless there is a lore reason I've missed in one of the books explaining a big change in the war population mindset, in Veilguard this very important aspect of the setting is absent. Dwarves have also been sidelined, being present only in Harding's quest and for a very limited amount of time. I wish there was more about them. Combat is a part of Veilguard that's good enough, even if it won't blow anyone's mind. Every single one of the base classes behaves differently during fights. The warrior I played was very tanky, charging head-on into battle and sustaining the brunt of it. While there are more damage-dealing versions of it, the champion was the specialization that called to me. Resistant, lore related to the Grey Wardens, and my warrior was one of them by background, so it fitted. I also love to roleplay tanks, but really it's fun gameplay-wise. It dealt physical and fire damage, with some ridiculous animations for the ultimate skills at its disposal, but most importantly was capable of parrying almost everything. Enemies have the usual variety of attacks you can parry, represented by a yellow halo around your character's head, and the ones you can't are preceded by a red one warning you. The champion was ultimately capable of parrying those two, getting unbalanced at most, and being able to quickly recover from that kind of attacks. I wasn't bored by it, and I'm grateful for that. I played the tank in Inquisition and it was really unfun, so I think Veilguard did the tank right, gameplay-wise. The rogue offered the most quick and zippy kind of combat, always dodging, heavily based on mobility, alternating between bows and arrows, and dual-wielding blades. When I chose the Veil Ranger specialization, I gradually went into more archery than anything else, eventually being able to slow time and headshot enemies for a huge amount of damage. It was also my nightmare run. I had to heavily rely on my companions to properly function, and boss fights got annoying by mid-game. They required 40 or 50 minutes to get done. Enemies were very spongy, resistant to various types of damage, and hit hard. Unfortunately, their set of moves was more or less the same, so combat wasn't that interesting going forward. You don't feel this problem so much at lower difficulties, like the normal one, here called Adventurer. I always think normal or core difficulties are the standard difficulties games are balanced around, and the way you determine if they did a good job or not. At Adventurer, I think Veilguard combat was fine. Maybe not great, but it did its job well enough. My third run was with a mage that eventually became a Deathcaller, and boy, at high level this specialization was broken. Mana was not a problem anymore. When depleted I used my health instead, and was leeching so many hit points back from my enemies that I could perpetually cast my right-click charge attack with the staff. Abilities were almost not needed anymore. That mage became a one-trick pony called Death Ray Joe, blasting everything with his blood magic, because that's what it is, despite BioWare saying you wouldn't be able to play a blood mage. Rook and companions are limited to 3 active skills at any given time. Out of combat you can swap them freely, assuming you have both them on your tree, and it might feel limiting. It's true that even if you have more than 3, every active ability you've bought will give you a plus 15% ability damage anyway, but it feels a bit of a waste to not use them. I wish you could use more, especially considering sometimes you have to change the type of elemental damage you cause. In combat, your 2 companions can't die, and you can control them, except for their abilities. Essentially, they are a pool of additional skills to use to heal, crowd control, or to complete your own for combos. Because while it's possible to tell your companion to attack a specific enemy, their damage is so low as to be imperceptible, but high damage can be inflicted by detonating a primer. Let me explain it, it's simpler than it sounds. Combos are obtained by applying a primer to your target and detonating it with a complementary skill. You only have 3 types of primers and detonations: Overwhelm, Sunder, and Weaken. Different skills can apply or detonate one of them, so you want to bring companions with you that have skills that synergize well with yours. Once applied an effect, activate the relative detonation skill, and you'll get an explosion that will deal a bunch of damage. This is a big chunk of companions' work, with the addition of healing, taunting, and controlling enemies. You can develop some of their skills to be automatically cast, but the cooldown for that is not shown. You don't have control over it, so this auto-casting ends up being a nice complement, but nothing to rely on. For example, Bellara can choose to heal you on her own if her healing ability isn't on cooldown. Davrin can taunt, but he will decide when to do that. Again, it can be useful, but it's not reliable. Every companion has one different skill that can trigger on its own if you buy the relative node on their skill tree. They're worth checking out. You can cast your companion's abilities in combat by pressing tab. Combat will pause, and you can decide on the UI that pops up what to cast and direct it to whom. If you don't want to stop the flow of combat, you can trigger their abilities with control +1 to 6. Companion skills also use a global cooldown, which is quite limiting. For example, if you just used Hardening for a combo, making her apply the Sundered effect, all of her skills will be locked out until her Shred ability cooldown wears off, and you can't use her Soothing Potion ability to heal. Rook has an ultimate ability that will depend on their class or subclass. It generates while fighting, and with special potions found in blue vases. Certain passives or equipment pieces make the ultimate generate faster. Some boss encounters are not terribly well designed, relegating you to very small spaces with big or numerous enemies. There are combat scenarios in which the camera may not perform very well, and you don't have enough space to roll away from attacks or to recover your main resource, but luckily there are few. You heal through yours or companion's skills and potions. You have 3 healing potions with you, this number may increase to 5 depending on your equipment, and you gather them by smashing green vases that are scattered around in good quantity. How much you heal with a potion is determined by gear and passive abilities. Equipment in this game is weird, more akin to a looter shooter than to an RPG. Every big chest you open will grant you a piece of gear for you or for your companions. You can also buy some gear at factions merchants. When you find a copy of a piece you already own, those copies will merge and grant you an upgraded version of the same item. It's the classical rarity progression going from white to green, to blue, to purple, to orange, and every upgrade will unlock a new bonus for that piece. There is also unique loot, you will find it in peculiar chests around the maps, usually hidden or after boss battles. Those unique items have strange bonuses that will change the way you play your class, most often accompanying them with maluses or strange behaviors. You can sell your equipment, so don't worry about losing pieces you might find useful later in the game. Equipment can also be upgraded at the Caretaker workshop at the Lighthouse, once per every level the workshop has. You'll spend resources like wood, cloth or demonic residues in doing so. You find those resources by fighting enemies, scattered on the maps, or you can buy them at vendors. You can upgrade the workshop from level 1 to 10 by collecting mementos found in the various maps. Mementos can also be bought from some merchants. The workshop can also apply enchantments to your gear and skills. You can enchant Rook skills and your companions ones. Pay attention to the categories at the top because most people miss it. Higher the workshop level, higher the power of the enchantment you can apply. Factions merchants sell you gear, mementos, and they have levels too. You increase a faction strength by doing their related quests and selling them junk. Mind you, some junk is more valuable to a faction than to another, and the game won't explain it to you. My suggestion is to keep your junk until the end of the game, when you'll assess what faction has fallen behind in strength. Then you can sell all your junk to them. The game also doesn't explain to you that a lot of merchants, not only the factions ones, sell special items that will give you a permanent bonus. Always read the items descriptions. Gear is tailored to your class. A warrior won't find mage equipment even if the appearance is the same. Also, equipment location is fixed, be it vendor or chests, so you can plan out your build. Plenty of guides around on where to find those pieces. I haven't used it much, but there's a transmog system in Veilguard, so I guess I should mention it. In your room there's a closet you can use to change your appearance, based on the armors and weapons you've found so far, so you can avoid looking hideous with your mishmashed equipment pieces. I'd say that in general, this loot system is not bad, but again, it's weird for a game that wants to be an RPG. Now, I've been mentioning the factions all over this video, so at this point I should talk about them. They are one of the not so great points of this game, at least in my book. Some are decent, others are quite unbelievable. Mild spoilers ahead. Veilguard will present you 6 factions, one per regional map. They have a strength indicator associated with those maps. As said, this strength will increase as you complete a quest for them or sell them junk. Their strength will be considered in the third act and the game ending, in a similar situation to Mass Effect 3 military strength points, so helping them is worth it. With higher strength comes the possibility to invest resources and upgrade their relative vendors, which in turn will sell you more equipment, mementos, and stuff in general. It's not a bad concept, I loved it in Mass Effect 3, but here those factions are weird. You're essentially using them as armies by the end. Spoilers I guess, but it was pretty clear. The presence of the strength indicator gives that away immediately. But these guys are ragtag groups like never seen before, and Rook's background is tied to one of them of your choice. Every companion, except for Harding, belongs to one of these factions. Veil Jumpers are brave but have no clue about what they're dealing with on a daily basis, giving the impression of a bunch of amateurs tinkering with the ancient nuclear warheads, and often with the results you can imagine. Grey Wardens don't need a presentation to anyone who played a Dragon Age game before. In Veilguard you find quite a bit of personalized dialogue if you belong with them, and I'm glad they finally came back. I've been missing them since Origins. They're obviously quite down on their luck, and I wish that by the end of the game a Grey Warden Rook or Evka got the recognition they deserved. The Shadow Dragons are, as the name implies, a shadow organization that liberates slaves and helps them escape Miratus or Tevinter. They're so effective you never see a slave in Miratus. I haven't seen them do much in any of my playthroughs, and it's a pity because they could have built some interesting storylines out of them. The Morn Watch is an order of necromancers from Nevarra. They tend to the Grand Necropolis and are a surprisingly nice bunch. Even more unexpected was the amount of personalized dialogue you get from this faction. There is a lot of it, especially with Emmerich, who is, of course, another Morn Watcher.
Hi, Emmerich.
Rook, hello. Just composing a few letters. The other Watchers have been most interested in our adventures.
You have more credibility than I do back home.
Perhaps. Speaking of home, have we really never met around the necropolis before, even in passing?
Emmerich, I'm a Kunari Morn Watcher. There's what, 15 of us?
14 now, I'm afraid. Tebelda passed away exploring the jaws of midnight.
May she rest among the graves.
Every new generation seems to think they'll be the ones to finally exhume that part of the necropolis.
The Antivan Crows are the notorious assassins organization that rules Antiva from the shadows, or not so much. While this faction offers some good NPCs in Theia and Viago, it has been reworked from the previous lore. They're not the ruthless assassins Zevran was running from, the ones who grab orphans or slaves and transform them into super dangerous hitmen against their will. Now they're a very well-loved organization in Treviso who takes care of the populace, and everything about them feels like taken from a South American telenovela, with Spanish and Italian accents. As an Italian myself, I laughed at them.
Caterina. Lucanis. My poor boy.
Lastly, we have the Lords of Fortune, a group of treasure hunters led by previous game's Isabella. They're supposedly good guys who steal from dragon hordes without killing them, if they can avoid it, and carefully check through experts if their treasure has cultural values. Because in that case, instead of selling it to random people, they sell it to experts of their field. Let's just say I didn't believe them for a second. It's also worthy of note that not all these factions have proper or even good personalized dialogue, if Rook is one of them by background, so choose wisely. Now let's talk about companions. They are a real mixed bag in Veilguard. Some are interesting, but their content is cut short. Others are likable, but feel out of place in a Dragon Age game. Others are, let's say, unlikable. This video is already a little spoilery, but this section needs another spoiler alert, because if I want to talk about companions at all, I need to touch on their personal storylines a little bit. They're all romanceable by whatever Rook you create, but not all romances are interesting. Generally, they're really shallow, with just a couple of interesting dialogue lines if you're lucky. You can flirt with all of them, and badly, because those flirting lines are quite bad. But the game will warn you when things get serious and when you're going to enter an exclusive relationship with someone. Nope, you can't sleep with everyone at the same time. Also, not that I'm looking for that in video games, but there's no sex scenes. They're implied, not shown. Those romances will progress along with the main story, so don't expect any progress in this regard in the first act. And depending on what companions Rook is going to romance, other companions will start relationships on their own. In contrast to what I just said, this was a nice touch in making your companions more believable, but there is no dramatic tension between companions. There is a brief moment of rivalry between Davrin and Lucanis, but it's gone as fast as it came. All dialogue is super supportive, making me sigh. Again, people don't behave like that, and sanitizing the dialogues makes everything less believable to me. Regarding their personal quests, They are divided into little segments you play all along the game, sometimes even in chunks of 3 minutes where you just talk to a couple of NPCs. I wish they weren't. I didn't like this fragmentation. It felt just like filler. Also, as I've already mentioned, not all of these quests are created equal. All have a choice Rook has to make at the end, but some have the exact same ending no matter what you choose. Companions also gain levels to a maximum of 10, and they gain experience by increasing their bond with you. You do so by resolving their personal stories and doing quests with them. Sometimes you may gain a little bond increase by killing particular enemies a companion despises. In doing so, you gain points to expand in their abilities tree, which is a smaller version of yours. You can freely respect them too. You can also buy gifts to give them, there's one for each companion, but doing so only increases your bond with them and shows you a very short and disappointing cutscene. There are also on-screen messages when a companion approves or disapproves of what you're saying, but this system doesn't really exist. There is no indicator of their approval anywhere, and they do not change their behavior or leave you. You're mostly forced to be nice to them anyway. There is a particular occurrence in the middle of Act 1 that may go against the wishes of one of your companions between the two involved, but in doing so they just leave for a while and then come back hardened. Hardened is a status only one of those two companions may gain. It will block off their healing skills for the rest of the game, but their damaging skills will perform better. That's it. Nothing else changes, and even this is very little. So, talking about the actual companions. Harding is the returning character from Inquisition. She's a dwarven sassy veteran of 10 years in the Inquisition, but behaves like a little girl. She's awkward, unsure of herself, and pretty much everything she says seems coming from a young teenager. I wish there was an explanation for this, something like she behaves in a silly manner as a reaction to the horror she witnessed with the Inquisition, but there's not. Her personal quest is the most interesting of them all, lore-wise at least, but sadly it's very shallow and never really explains the most interesting parts. She's a fan favorite, maybe because she has Liara's voice from Mass Effect. Neve is a private detective from Murathus and part of the Shadow Dragons. She takes Dogtown, the destitute part of the city, to heart and wants to genuinely help its citizens. She's a nice mage, speaks in monotone, and an observation I can make is that Neve, in Italian means snow. I didn't like her at the beginning, but when I started taking her with Rook as an active companion in my second run, she grew on me. Her romance has a few interesting lines, probably the best ones. She has a prosthetic leg, and the only thing she says about it is that it's a job gone sideways. Again, the game cut short on something that could have been an interesting story that would have added to a cool character. Silly and horrible heads aside, she even has walking animations in cutscenes where it seems she should have had a walking stick, maybe a mage staff, but it was scrapped. A lot of missed opportunities around this character. Bellara is a veil jumper, and very quirky even for their standards. She's the most cartoonish character you have. Even the music when she's involved reminds of a Disney movie. She's a very good healer to have in the party, and I kinda liked her, but always thought how she didn't belong. I had her coupled with Harding in my active party with the warrior, and their banter was simply awful. Lucanis is one of the best Antivan crows in existence. He's gone missing for a year, and you have to bust him out of a cool prison. Remember Jack in Mass Effect 2? Same. He's possessed by a demon, and I think the point here was to instill in you constant doubts if something comes from Lucanis himself or from the demon, but I think they failed. This guy, an incredible assassin, is such a nice and likable guy that you cannot avoid rooting for him. Also, demons can only possess mages, the lore says. How did Spite come to possess an assassin? A man without magical capabilities and a connection to the Fade? Again, this conundrum is mentioned in the game, but sadly never answered. Davrin is a Grey Warden with a small griffon with a floppy ear as a pet. Griffons went extinct in the lore, right? Not really, but at least his personal quest is interesting. It dives into some hidden Grey Warden lore, and personally I think it's one of the best companions and the best personal quest Veilguard has to offer. Too bad this quest has some ridiculous moments. I'm talking the Walking Dead bad moments level, like escaping a Darkspawn horde into a dead dragon's ribcage. You can easily slide through ribs with heavy armor, but small ghouls can. And then you just smash through those ribs when an ogre couldn't. Sometimes this game really tests your suspension of disbelief limits. I also liked Davrin's dialogue. He's a foot soldier, very stoic and pragmatic. He even touches some issues I feel close to, like survivor's guilt and the incredible void soldiers feel when they retire from service. If coupled with Nev in the active party, which I did with the rogue, you can have a good party banter. Emmerich is a necromancer who is also a gentleman, and I found that to be a nice subversion of expectations limitations. He also has a comic relief in the form of a skeleton butler animated by a spirit of curiosity. They paid Matt Mercer to do these skeleton sisses. Think about that for a moment. To be fair, Matt Mercer has other roles in this game, not only this one, but still. Emmerich has a lot of personalized dialogue, especially if Rook is a Morn Watcher too, and his personal quest was interesting, but it felt out of place again for how he perceived the Dragon Age setting. Not in the tones, but in the way it was portrayed. It felt like an Addams Family episode with an animated movie villain, but I really liked having him around. Lastly, Tash is a dragon hunter tied to the Lords of Fortune. Shatan, Tash's mother, is the Kunari artifact expert for Isabella and her organization. Mother and daughter constantly clash, like a very strict parent with an edgy teen kid. Probably, the internet knows everything there is to know about this character by now. I'll just say I didn't like anything about this storyline. I found it heavy-handed and cringy. If I had to say one thing in this affair, it's the volcano map that was pretty cool. And this reminds me to add that you can't dismiss your companions, or refuse to let them join you. You have them, and that's it. To conclude this section, I want to mention cameos briefly. In Veilguard, you meet some characters from previous games, besides Varric and Solas. Morrigan is here, and plays an important part in the main story. Sadly, she's been sanitized too. There is no trace of the old sassy, snarky, sarcastic and confrontational Morrigan, my hero of Ferelden fled the country with through an alluvian. The hero is not even mentioned in passing, like it was in Inquisition. Isabella comes back as the Lords of Fortune leader, changed both physically and in temperament. She was a very dangerous woman to have around, in more meanings than one, but here she's diminished too. We also have a Dorian appearance. He saves you from an ugly situation during the main quest, and then you can help him in a very important event that strangely happens as a secondary quest, and only if you meet a certain requirement. This was really weird, given the importance of the event. The Inquisitor is really downplayed. They appear a couple of times just to tell sweet nothings to you like a proper politician. There are some interesting lines of dialogue though, if she is the female elven Inquisitor that loved Solas. Only if you have these prerequisites. Other cameos include Hare and Valta, and a lot of characters from the books and comics. Just to name a few, we have Myrna from the Morn Watch, Evka and Antoine as Grey Wardens, Taya and Viago among the Crows, Strife and Irulan from the Veil Jumpers. I wish I could have had Taya, Evka and Myrna as full-blown companions, they're quite cool. I also really wanted to know what Vorgoth is, but Emmerich only says no one knows what it is. In passing, if you have him in your active party. Man, there was some good lore in there to be had. Instead I had nothing. Regarding visuals, I feel I have to divide them into character design and the sceneries. The character art direction is weird and looks cartoonish a lot. It's not ugly, you have some nice models in it, but it's such a strange choice for a Dragon Age game. It feels like a big miss in the Dragon Age vibes to me. Enemies' models are very cartoonish too, especially the Darkspawn. There is a reason given in the game why they look different, but the problem is not that they are different, it's that they look like a young adult middle school target animated series. Facial animations are not that great either. Sometimes there is some very well voice acted lines conveying emotions, and the character's face doesn't reflect that at all. There has also been a lot of talk about Kunari looking more like humans with horns in Veilguard, and I don't understand the logic behind it. I'll just note that Stan in Origins was very human-like, they changed the models in Dragon Age 2 to be more intimidating, and then came back to more human-like Kunari in Inquisition. Yes, Iron Ball was intimidating, but the others were not. I don't pretend to know what the reasoning behind this is, it's just not related to Veilguard only. From the lore standpoint, coherence would be good though. Sceneries instead are beautiful. All maps have gorgeous vistas, and the game says so itself, blowing its own horn from time to time. I can mention them all, but I found Arlatan Forest and Treviso to be particularly beautiful. Even the skyboxes are great. I often found myself to stop and just slowly move the mouse to pan around the landscape. The music in this game though is surprisingly underwhelming. It's not bad by any means, but good RPGs usually have a strong soundtrack, music that become the co-protagonist of the adventures you're living. In Veilguard, with the exception of a couple of tracks, it's all quite forgettable.
Never seen that in any monster manuals. I'm ready to go again.
And there are moments when you notice a track that feels like a Mass Effect 1, presenting a very modern sci-fi tone, and you ask yourself, what game am I playing now? It's particularly baffling when we consider that one of the two composers is a huge name like Hans Zimmer. On the flip side of the coin, voice acting is generally very good, one of the best assets of this game, with some notable exceptions here and there. Jokes aside, there's a lot of good work in here made by competent voice actors. I especially liked the performances of the first Rook male voice, the female Rook voice with the Northumbrian accent, Varric, Solas, Harding and Davrin. Lucanis was great too, and made me overconscious of the fact that they also exaggerate the age in half. Claudia Black is always great as Morrigan. Let's wrap this one up. It took a great amount of effort to put this video together, not only for its length, but also for how discussed this game was. I wondered if it was worth covering at all, but I've spent so much time and effort in this game I refused to quit. To summarize, I found Dragon Age the Veilguard to be the very definition of a mixed bag. Some parts of it are very well made, like the level design, the graphics, the voice acting. Others were just fine, like the combat or some companions. But big fundamental blocks of it, in my very personal opinion, were quite below average. And they started to sink on me as I played this game more and more. I felt the need to be honest, but at the same time somewhat tactful, conveying constructive criticism and not trash talk. I hope I succeeded in my endeavor. If this game were an action RPG from a AA production, without the BioWare and Dragon Age labels on it, I could see it in a more positive way. Like Banishers, for example. But this is a huge production, from a company that was the absolute protagonist of the RPG video game scene for decades. And after 9 years of development, they come up with this? It's not terrible or trash like the usual overblown claims on the internet say, but it's very difficult to give this game a full pass. Again, Veilguard is not completely bad, but not even completely decent, and that's one of the reasons why I don't assign scores. I talk about different aspects of games, so you can understand my thought process on the different facets of a complex product and make up your own mind. Maybe you don't agree with me, and that's fine. Let me know in the comment what you liked or not, and why. I've been playing RPGs all my life since I was 10 years old, both on computer and pen and paper. What kind of gaming company creates an RPG without RPG enthusiasts in mind? I don't know if this supposed audience they were aiming at is even a smaller group than classic Dragon Age fans. I don't know if they made the right business decisions here. What company creates a game for a franchise, disregarding the core elements those franchises fans loved? I am baffled, and I'm at the point where I'm worried about BioWare. Again, they were absolute heavyweights in the RPG field, but their last 3 productions in a row are Mass Effect Andromeda, Anthem, and this one. I don't even think they made their money back. Anyway, that's all I can muster about this game. It's time to move on. Thank you so much for watching, I really appreciate it. Please like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff that helps me reach more people out there. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next video.
Look at this. I bet it came in handy. You had to hand it to the ancient elves. They love their statues. Such craftsmanship. Handmade from stone.
I'm glad someone's amused.